Hey folks, Zach Osterman here. I'm Insider, Indianapolis Star with your Friday rundown. We'll have the three keys in a minute. Just a couple of recruiting notes. Um, First of all, I think there was some buzz earlier this week about the possibility of Liam McNeely committing to Indiana. It does seem like that's quieted down. I think McNeely's told a couple reporters now he hasn't made a firm decision. It does seem certainly like his recruitment is moving toward its conclusion. I think we can all recognize that. It seems like, particularly since he canceled his Texas visit, Kansas and Indiana have kind of moved to the fore as maybe, if you want to call them, two finalists, although I don't know that McNeely has declared them specifically, just sort of come out and publicly said, I'm only considering these two schools. I do think that will resolve itself based on what I'm hearing pretty soon, but that pretty soon doesn't necessarily mean the next 24 to 48 hours. I think we're probably still looking at a few days at least. But I do think that's probably at least based on what I have heard and people I have talked to in the end stages. I don't know where he's going. This is not me. You'll have to look to Trilly Donovan for the bat signal on that one. But and I do think Trilly has already predicted for Indiana. But one way or the other, it does seem like maybe suggestions this week that might be imminent were a little bit premature, but I don't think Indiana or Kansas fans are going to be left sort of hanging on the line on that one for like another month or so. I could be wrong, but based on what I've heard, I think it is sort of closing in on the end stages. The other sort of recruiting note, Boogie Fland told 24/7 Sports he's down to three schools. Indiana was in to see him yesterday up in New York, where he plays high school basketball at Archbishop Stepinac. And Indiana is one of those three schools alongside Kentucky and Alabama. Fland has, I think he gave, pretty generic, what you'd expect kind of quotes to 24/7, but all three schools. It is worth noting, Indiana is the only school he hasn't visited yet officially as a senior. He took a junior year official visit over the summer. He'd still be allowed to take a senior year official. I've been hearing for a long time that's expected to get set up. It hasn't been publicly confirmed yet, but you would be surprised if he named three finalists, so to speak, and visited two of them and not the third. I would guess that will happen sometime in early mid-October. It's worth saying you don't always have that player on campus for Hoosier Hysteria because there's a lot going on around Hoosier Hysteria. There's a lot of players, sort of coming and going, players in the kind of the classes, maybe down the ladder a little bit, your junior class, your sophomore class. And when you have a player like that on campus, you want to be able to devote all your attention to that player, or, in the case of McNeely and Derek Queen and Curtis Givens, just a small group of players to basically be able to say, you are getting our full and undivided attention throughout the entirety of your weekend visit. Not saying he won't be in town for Hoosier Hysteria, Boogie Fland, this is, but I do wonder if Indiana would rather maybe have him in on, for lack of a better term, his own weekend, frankly. And again, the other thing I would say to this is by the time you're watching this video, I'm cutting this a little bit early this week because I'll be traveling to Maryland tomorrow. That could change. Again, Indiana visited him this week, so there's every chance that a visit kind of gets confirmed back in the other direction to Bloomington. In the near future, obviously, if Indiana doesn't get a visit, and again, I expect they will, but if Indiana doesn't get a visit, then, that probably tells its own story with Fland. But it does feel like Indiana's really kind of down to kind of that big four in 2024, Fland, McNeely, Queen, and at least to some extent Givens, although Givens kind of came into the whole sort of recruiting focus a little bit later, and there's always been a feeling that he may stay in the South. He's from Memphis originally, if I'm not mistaken. But he did visit officially. He's teammates at Montverde Academy with McNeely and Queen, so you never say never in recruiting. But just wanted to get those two notes kind of out of the way, and just sort of let, just kind of put that out there. Three keys for this weekend at Maryland. The first one is an obvious one for Indiana, and that's Talia Tagovailoa. He's maybe pound for pound the best quarterback in the Big Ten. He's done nothing really to dispel that through Maryland's first four games. He hasn't necessarily been prolific, but he's been efficient. He's completing a slightly lower percentage of his passes than a season ago. But, if you look at it, he's still on pace for well over 3,000 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, single-digit interceptions, which at times have been a bit of an issue for him. But, he looks every bit kind of the senior signal caller, leader, all those kinds of things for a team that, frankly, if I'm being honest, I expected Maryland to maybe regress just a little bit this year. They had a very good year last year. Sometimes, we've seen with an Indiana, with a Northwestern, with a Rutgers, sometimes maintaining that level of success when expectation goes up and pressure goes up and maybe teams aren't overlooking you quite so much can be difficult. But Maryland it's hard to argue with the way they've started 4-0. In the end, 4 pretty comfortable victories. We'll come on to that in a minute. But Tagovailoa has been a really big piece of that. On the flip side, Indiana has had some success making quarterbacks uncomfortable this year. I know last week Indiana really got burned with with DJ Irons from Akron, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Tagovailoa has some mobility to him, but he's not like Irons. He's not, there were times in that game where you could tell Akron just had Irons in run first mode. The number of times Akron was running basically design quarterback runs, design quarterback draws. Maryland won't do a lot of that with Tagovailoa. He's still very much a pocket passer. He can move the pocket east and west, which when you consider how Indiana maybe struggled with contain at times, not just against Akron, but also against Louisville, that can be an issue. He's good moving the pocket. He's good throwing on the run, Tagovailoa. And if the opportunity is there, he'll tuck the ball and tear off downfield. But he's not necessarily somebody that you expect to, get you for 200 passing yards and 100 rushing yards every game. He's still much more sort of pass focused as a quarterback. So getting him uncomfortable, getting him off rhythm, making him, forcing him into some mistakes, keeping the pressure up on him. Indiana has been among the best teams in the Big Ten so far this season in, kind of quarterback pressure stats, sacks, tackles for loss, QB pressures or hurries, however you want to term that. That's got to keep up this weekend because as Maryland, as the Terps quarterback goes, they go. And Indiana's got a much better chance of springing an upset Saturday if it can slow Tagovailoa down. Number 2, to go from slow to slow starts. Indiana's, we've talked about at length, just sort of the Ohio State game and the Indiana State game almost being their own thing. They only had 7 points at halftime against Akron on Saturday. The weekend before, they were shut out in the first half against Louisville before having a really, really good offensive second half. Tom Allen has talked endlessly about kind of trying to figure out why it is that Indiana's not starting games well, particularly offensively, why it is that maybe his team takes a while almost for its engine to warm up. And that's got to, again, that's particularly offensively, that's got to change in a game like this. You've got to put some scoreboard pressure on an opponent like Maryland. When we talk about making Maryland, whether it's Tagovailoa or somebody else, make mistakes, that's not just necessarily, you get pressure in him, you hand in his face, and he throws an errant pass that's intercepted. Sometimes it's also maybe feeling a certain sense of urgency that is sort of pressed when you get a couple early scores. Because it is also worth saying Maryland's 4-0. Maryland has had some slow starts this season. Maryland was down 14-0 at home to Charlotte. It was down, I think, 14-0 as well, I believe, also at home to Virginia. Now, last weekend, Maryland goes to Michigan State, leading 21-3 at halftime. Obviously, Michigan State's kind of got its own thing going on. So maybe Maryland has resolved a little bit of its own issues just with some sluggish starts. But it has been a bit of an issue for the Terps in the past. Can you get them in a place where maybe they start to feel a little bit rushed? They start to feel like they need to force some things. And that's, I think, one of the ways you're going to win this game, if you're Indiana and you do win it, is going to be to force some of those mistakes out of Maryland. And I think one of the ways you can do that is to apply some scoreboard pressure. Maybe Maryland doesn't feel that so much. They have kind of dealt with it a couple times already this season. But if you're Indiana, it really wouldn't hurt to just kind of maybe tear off scores on your first 3 drives and just see how it affects Maryland. Because I do think Indiana's defense has the capacity, especially if it's a little bit healthier at corner than it's been the last couple of weeks, to really compete in this game and to give Maryland some trouble and slow Maryland down a little bit. The last thing I would say for Indiana is obvious, but I think it is more relevant than anything else, just response. Indiana has justifiably kind of treated Akron as a loss. It wasn't. Indiana did win the game. And, listen, if Indiana's at 6 wins at the end of the season, nobody's going to make them give the Akron game back just because they played poorly. But there has been a lot of the sort of self-reflection and self-evaluation and sort of tough criticism, self-criticism, frankly, from players, from coaches, From the team as a collective this week, it has been clear that everyone sort of understood everything about the build-up to Akron when Tom Allen felt his team really wasn't focusing or giving Akron enough focus and respect, all the way through to the way the team performed through that game, needing 4 overtimes to see off a pretty mediocre MAC team. Everyone has, sort of said all the right things around that wasn't acceptable, that's got to change, that can't happen again. Everything about, all the lessons sort of learned from that game revolve in some way around basically not allowing that sort of, just the bad start, the sloppiness offensively, maybe some of the casualness about the approach to the opponent, not allowing any of that to happen again. But frankly, there's an extent to which you only prove that you're capable of that on the field. And Indiana has got to show a real response in this game. And I hesitate to call this a must-win. Maryland on the road is difficult. Indiana is a 3-score underdog. On the other hand, you lose this, then you got your bye week, then you're at Michigan, and you lose that game, and suddenly you're 2-4, and you start to feel like you're kind of living on a knife edge if you want to keep bowl eligibility or even just a respectable competitive end of the season on the table. And so it does feel like a game where if Indiana doesn't need to win it, Indiana at very least needs to come out of it feeling like a lot of things are fixed, a lot of things are moving forward, that there's a lot of progress on both sides of the ball, but particularly offensively, this offense has just got to get better. I mean, Tom Allen has said multiple times now that its performance through the first 4 weeks has been well below his standard, well below his expectation, and I think you can see that just in the production, the consistency, the efficiency, all those different kinds of things. That's got to improve. And this isn't necessarily the place where you'd want to have to do it on the road against an undefeated Big Ten opponent. But, this is kind of the position Indiana's put itself in, and it needs that response this weekend. So Hoosiers are at Maryland, 3:30 Saturday. Big Ten Network, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, we'll be there. We'll have all the attendant coverage from College Park, as we always do. Between now and then, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. Thank you so much for watching this early Friday rundown. You may see it on Friday, but this was, just to let you know how the sausage made. This was cut on Thursday. We will talk to you very soon.